The throne room of the Valorian Empire stretched across half a mile of polished obsidian floors. Thousands of alien nobles filled the gallery, their silver skin gleaming under crystalline chandeliers that floated without chains. Queen Seraphine sat upon her throne of living metal, her 4 eyes scanning the creature being dragged before her in chains. A human. The first one ever brought to the heart of the Empire. His name was Eric, and he looked nothing like the savage beast the reports had described. He was young, perhaps 25 cycles by their measurement. His clothes were torn. Blood marked his face. Yet something in his eyes made several nobles step backward without knowing why. The queen raised one elegant hand, and silence consumed the chamber. Her voice echoed like thunder across still water. Kneel before the throne of Valoria, human. Kneel, and perhaps I will let you live long enough to explain why your kind destroyed 3 of my border stations. Eric lifted his head and looked directly at her. 6 standard months earlier, Eric had been a cargo pilot running supply routes through the Outer Rim territories. He worked for a small human trading company that barely made enough to keep their ships fueled. Life was simple. Deliver goods. Get paid. Avoid the major empires that carved up the galaxy like territorial predators. Humanity had only discovered faster-than-light travel 30 years ago. In galactic terms, they were infants stumbling into a room full of giants. The Valorian Empire controlled over 2,000 star systems. Their technology was so advanced that human scientists wept when they first analyzed a captured Valorian data pad. The Empire had existed for 40,000 years, and they viewed younger species the way humans might view interesting insects. Eric never expected to encounter them directly. His route kept him far from their borders, traveling through unclaimed space where only smugglers and desperate merchants dared to venture. Then his navigation system malfunctioned during a hyperspace jump. He emerged in the wrong place entirely. The Valorian border station detected his ship immediately.
Your ship is surrounded. Comply or be
Eric
destroyed.
tried to explain through emergency channels that he was lost, that his arrival was an accident, that he meant no harm to anyone. The station commander laughed at his transmission. Humans were not authorized to enter Valorian space under any circumstances. Before Eric could reverse course, the station locked weapons on his vessel and demanded he surrender for processing. Processing, he later learned, meant interrogation, memory extraction, and eventual sale to a labor colony. Eric made a decision in that moment that would change everything. He ran. His ship was old, but it was fast. Human engineers had a talent for pushing engines beyond their theoretical limits. He burned through 3 patrol zones before they finally cornered him near a dead moon. But during the chase, something happened that no one anticipated. A Valorian commander opened fire on Eric near a civilian transport hub. The shots missed Eric and struck the hub instead. 200 Valorian civilians died in the explosion. Eric did not fire a single weapon. His cargo ship did not even carry weapons. But the Valorian military needed someone to blame, and a primitive human made the perfect target. They captured him within hours. The news spread across the Empire like wildfire. A human savage had attacked innocent Valorians without provocation. The Emperor himself demanded answers. When investigators discovered that 2 additional border stations had reported human ships in their sectors that same week, the narrative became even darker. Humanity was testing Valorian defenses. This was the beginning of an invasion. None of it was true, but truth rarely matters when fear takes hold. Eric was transported to the capital world in chains designed for creatures 3 times his size. He was thrown into a cell beneath the palace and left there for weeks while the Empire decided what to do with him. Then came the summons to appear before Queen Seraphine. Princess Zoe watched from the upper gallery as the human was brought forward. She was the queen's only daughter, heir to the throne, and she had never seen a human before. The intelligence reports described them as primitive, violent, and dangerously unpredictable. This one looked tired. He looked like someone who had been fighting just to survive for a very long time. Zoe found herself leaning forward as her mother demanded his submission. Protocol required all beings to kneel before the throne. It was not merely tradition. It was law. Those who refused were executed on the spot. The human had to know this. Every prisoner was informed of proper conduct before entering the throne room. The guards made certain of it. Yet when the queen commanded him to kneel, the human did something that made Zoe's breath catch in her throat. He smiled. It was not a smile of madness or defiance. It was the smile of someone who had already accepted death and found peace with it. "I do not kneel," Eric said calmly. The throne room erupted. Nobles shouted in outrage. Guards raised their weapons. Queen Seraphine's 4 eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. "You dare refuse a direct command from the throne?" Eric shook his head slowly. "You misunderstand, Your Majesty. I am not refusing because I wish to insult you. I am refusing because where I come from, we only kneel before those who have earned our respect through their actions. I do not know you. I have never met you. You are a stranger demanding submission based solely on the accident of your birth." The silence that followed was absolute. No one in 40,000 years had spoken to a Valorian monarch this way. Zoe felt her heart's pounding as she stared at the human. He was either the bravest creature she had ever witnessed or the most foolish. Perhaps both. Queen Seraphine rose from her throne, and every being in the chamber held their breath. The queen descended the steps slowly, her robes trailing behind her like liquid shadow. She stopped directly in front of Eric and studied him the way a scientist might study an unusual specimen. "Your people destroyed my stations," she said quietly. "Killed my citizens." Eric met her gaze without flinching. "Your commander destroyed your station when he fired recklessly near civilians while chasing an unarmed cargo vessel. I was running for my life because your people decided to capture me simply for existing in the wrong place. I have never harmed anyone." The queen tilted her head. "You expect me to believe a human over my own military reports?" "I expect nothing," Eric replied. "But I will not kneel before someone who condemns me without evidence. If that means death, then at least I will die standing." From the gallery, Zoe whispered something to her attendant. The attendant hurried away with wide eyes. Something was about to change. The queen raised her hand to signal the executioner, but before she could complete the gesture, a voice rang out across the chamber. "Wait." Every head turned toward the gallery. Princess Zoe stood at the railing, her silver skin catching the light. "Mother, I request the right of inquiry." The throne room buzzed with confused murmurs. The right of inquiry was an ancient tradition that allowed royal family members to delay judgment in order to investigate claims personally. It had not been invoked in over 3,000 years. Queen Seraphine's expression flickered with surprise. "You wish to investigate this human's claims yourself?" "I do," Zoe replied firmly. "If he speaks truth, then we are about to execute an innocent being and potentially start a war with his species based on lies. If he speaks falsely, I will discover it and ensure his punishment is legendary." The queen studied her daughter for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Very well. You have 30 rotations." Eric was escorted to a holding chamber rather than returned to his cell. Guards stood at every exit, but the room itself was comfortable. Clean bedding. Proper food. A window that overlooked the palace gardens. He did not understand why the princess had intervened. The door opened, and Zoe entered alone. She dismissed the guards with a wave and stood studying Eric with an expression he could not read. "You are either very brave or very stupid," she said. Eric shrugged. "Most humans are a little of both." Zoe did not smile. "I have reviewed the preliminary reports from the border incident. There are inconsistencies that trouble me. Sensor logs that were classified immediately after the event. Witness statements that contradict the official narrative." Eric felt something he had not felt in weeks. Hope. Why would you help me? He asked. Zoe's expression hardened. I am not helping you. I am protecting my empire from making a catastrophic mistake. Over the following days, Zoe conducted her investigation with brutal efficiency. She interviewed military commanders, reviewed classified sensor data, and tracked down the original patrol ships involved in the chase. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The border station commander had been running an illegal smuggling operation. When Eric's ship appeared unexpectedly, the commander panicked and opened fire to prevent any witnesses from escaping. The civilian transport hub was destroyed to cover his crimes. The 3 other human ships reported in Valorian space were actually sensor ghosts created by the commander's own equipment malfunction. There was no human invasion. There was only a corrupt official who murdered his own people and blamed an innocent stranger. Zoe confronted the commander personally. He attempted to flee and was captured within hours. Under interrogation, he confessed to everything. The princess now faced an impossible choice. Revealing the truth would humiliate the military and destabilize her mother's authority. But staying silent would mean murdering an innocent man. Zoe visited Eric's chamber late one evening, long after the palace had grown quiet. She found him sitting by the window, staring at unfamiliar stars. The investigation is complete, she said softly. Eric turned to face her. His expression was calm, resigned. He had clearly prepared himself for bad news. The commander confessed, Zoe continued. You are innocent of all charges. Something shifted in Eric's eyes. Surprise, followed by confusion. Then why do you look so troubled? Zoe sat down across from him. Because revealing the truth will cause tremendous damage to my empire. The military will lose credibility. My mother's enemies will use this scandal against her. Wars have started over less. Eric nodded slowly. So you have to choose between justice and stability. Yes. They sat in silence for several minutes. Then Eric spoke. Where I come from, we have a saying. The truth does not care about our convenience. It simply waits until we are brave enough to face it. Zoe spent 3 days wrestling with her decision. She consulted advisors who urged her to bury the evidence. She spoke with generals who threatened dire consequences if she proceeded. She even approached her mother privately, testing the waters. Queen Seraphine listened without expression. What would you do? Zoe asked. The queen turned away. I would do whatever necessary to protect the empire. Even if it meant killing an innocent man. The queen did not answer. That night, Zoe made her choice. She compiled all evidence into a formal report and requested an emergency session of the High Council. News spread quickly through the palace. Something unprecedented was about to happen. Eric was brought before the council in chains once more. But this time, Princess Zoe stood beside him. The chamber fell silent as she began speaking. She told them everything. The council erupted into chaos. Military leaders shouted denials. Noble families demanded Zoe's removal from succession. Several advisors accused her of being manipulated by the human prisoner. Queen Seraphine sat motionless on her throne, watching her daughter face the storm alone. Eric watched too. He saw how Zoe's hands trembled slightly despite her steady voice. He saw how isolated she looked standing against the most powerful beings in the empire. She had sacrificed everything for truth. For him. When the shouting reached its peak, Eric did something no one expected. He stepped forward and raised his voice above the noise. Enough. The single word cut through the chaos like a blade. Every eye turned to the human prisoner who had dared to speak without permission. Eric looked directly at Queen Seraphine. Your daughter just demonstrated more courage than everyone in this room combined. She chose justice over power. That is not weakness. That is strength. The queen rose slowly. Her expression was unreadable. "You defend my daughter," she said quietly. "Why?" Eric did not hesitate. "Because she defended me when no one else would. Because she chose truth when lies would have been easier. Because that is what leaders are supposed to do." A murmur rippled through the council. Queen Seraphine descended from her throne and approached Eric. She stopped mere inches from his face, studying him with all four eyes. "You still have not knelt," she observed. Eric met her gaze steadily. "No, I have not." The chamber held its breath. Then the queen did something that would be discussed for generations. She inclined her head toward Eric in a gesture of acknowledgement. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "respect must be earned both ways." The corrupt commander was executed publicly 3 days later. The military underwent a complete investigation that exposed additional corruption throughout the border command structure. Dozens of officers faced trial. Eric was officially cleared of all charges. But his situation remained complicated. He could not simply return home. The journey through Valorian space was too dangerous, and his ship had been destroyed during his capture. He was effectively stranded in the heart of an alien empire. Queen Seraphine offered a solution that surprised everyone. "The human will remain at the palace as a diplomatic observer," she announced. "He will serve as a bridge between our peoples until formal relations can be established." Eric suspected the queen had ulterior motives. She wanted to study humanity up close, to understand the species that had produced someone capable of standing unbowed before her throne. But he accepted the offer. He had nowhere else to go. Zoe was assigned as Eric's official liaison, a decision that pleased neither of them initially. The princess resented being reduced to a caretaker role. Eric resented being treated like a specimen requiring supervision. But forced proximity bred unexpected understanding. Zoe learned that humans were far more complex than intelligence reports suggested. They were capable of profound creativity and devastating violence, often within the same individual. Their emotions were messy and powerful and strangely beautiful. Eric learned that Valorians were not the cold, superior beings he had imagined. They loved fiercely. They feared deeply. They struggled with duty and desire just like humans did. Late one evening, Zoe found Eric in the garden, staring at a fountain that sang with bioluminescent water. "Do you miss your home?" she asked. Eric was quiet for a moment. "I missed the idea of home. But I stopped belonging anywhere a long time ago." Zoe sat beside him. "Perhaps you could belong here." Months passed. Eric became a familiar presence in the palace. He attended council sessions as an observer. He trained with Valorian warriors who were initially contemptuous but gradually grew to respect his tenacity. He learned the language, the customs, the unspoken rules of imperial politics. And he grew closer to Zoe. Their friendship deepened into something neither was willing to name. There were moments of accidental contact that lingered. Conversations that stretched until dawn. Shared laughter that felt dangerous and precious. The court noticed. Rumors spread through the noble houses like poison. The princess was becoming attached to the human. She was forgetting her duty. She was contaminating the royal bloodline with primitive sentiment. Queen Seraphine summoned Zoe to a private audience. "You are playing with fire," the queen warned. Zoe lifted her chin defiantly. "I am doing nothing inappropriate." The queen's 4 eyes narrowed. "Not yet. But I see how you look at him. And I see how he looks at you." 3 weeks later, disaster struck. A faction of military officers who had lost power during the corruption purge launched a coordinated attack on the palace. They called themselves the Restoration, and they blamed Eric for their downfall. Without his defiance, they argued, the investigation would never have happened. They wanted him dead. They wanted the queen dead. They wanted to return the empire to the way things were. The attack came at midnight. Explosions rocked the palace. Armed soldiers poured through breached walls. The royal guard fought desperately but was overwhelmed by the sheer numbers. Eric woke to the sound of gunfire and immediately began moving. He found Zoe in the corridor outside her chambers, surrounded by 3 attackers. Her personal guards lay motionless on the ground. Without hesitation, Eric charged. Eric had no weapons and no armor. He had only his hands and his determination. The attackers were trained soldiers with advanced technology. It should have been a slaughter. But Eric fought with a ferocity that startled even himself. He moved through the attackers like a force of nature, using every dirty trick he had learned in the rough ports of the Outer Rim. He broke one soldier's arm. He disabled another with a strike to the throat. The third managed to wound him badly before Eric brought him down. Zoe stared at him with wide eyes. "You came for me," she whispered. Eric clutched his bleeding side. "Of course I did." The sounds of battle echoed through the palace. The Restoration was winning. The royal guard was falling back. Eric grabbed Zoe's hand. "We need to get to the queen. Now." They fought their way through the palace corridors, moving toward the throne room where the queen had established a defensive position. Eric's wound slowed him down, but he refused to stop. Zoe stayed close, using a weapon taken from a fallen soldier. When they finally reached the throne room, they found chaos. The queen stood before her throne, surrounded by the last of her loyal guards. A Restoration general named Vorn held the chamber with 50 soldiers. He was demanding her surrender. "Yield the throne," Vorn said coldly, "and your death will be quick." Queen Seraphine's expression was contemptuous. "I do not yield to traitors." Eric assessed the situation. The numbers were impossible. Even if he could fight, he could not defeat 50 armed soldiers. This was a battle they could not win through force. But perhaps they could win another way. He stepped forward into the open. Every weapon in the room turned toward him. Eric raised his empty hands. "General Vorn," he called out. "You claim to fight for the Empire's honor. But what honor is there in murdering your own queen?" Vorn sneered. "The human speaks. How amusing." Eric continued calmly. "You blame me for exposing your corruption. But the truth was always there. I was simply the excuse that forced you to see it. Killing me will not restore your lost power. Killing the queen will not erase your crimes. It will only prove that you were never worthy of the positions you held." Several soldiers shifted uncomfortably. "You built your careers on lies," Eric continued. "Every promotion. Every medal. Every moment of respect you received was stolen from those who deserved it more. This rebellion is not about the Empire. It is about your wounded pride." Vorn's face contorted with rage. He raised his weapon. And a single shot rang out. Vorn fell. Behind him stood a young soldier who had just made a choice. The rebellion collapsed within hours. Without Vorn's leadership, the remaining conspirators surrendered or fled. The palace guard regained control, and by dawn, the crisis was over. Eric collapsed from blood loss shortly after the throne room was secured. He woke 3 days later in the palace medical wing. Zoe sat beside his bed, her silver skin pale with exhaustion. She had not left his side the entire time. "You saved my life," she said softly. Eric managed a weak smile. "You saved mine first. We are even now." Zoe shook her head. "No. We are not even. What you did in that throne room was something no one else could have done. You turned their soldiers against them with nothing but words." Eric looked at her. "I meant what I said about truth. It is more powerful than weapons. More powerful than fear." Zoe reached out and took his hand. She did not let go. Queen Seraphine visited Eric personally once he was strong enough to receive guests. She stood at the foot of his bed and studied him with those 4 piercing eyes. "You fought for my daughter," she said. "You fought for me. You turned the tide of a battle with your voice alone." Eric inclined his head. "I did what needed to be done." The queen was silent for a long moment. "When you first stood before my throne, I saw a primitive creature too stubborn to understand his place. I was wrong. What I saw was strength that my own people have forgotten. Courage that comes from conviction, not from power." She stepped closer. "I once demanded that you kneel. I understand now why you refused. You were right. Respect must be earned." Then Queen Seraphine of the Valorian Empire did something unprecedented. She bowed her head to a human. 1 month later, Eric stood before the full council of the Valorian Empire. This time, he wore the formal robes of an official ambassador. This time, no chains bound his wrists. By unanimous vote, the council had appointed him as the first human representative to the empire. Formal diplomatic relations with Earth would begin immediately. Trade agreements were being drafted. A new era was beginning. But Eric barely heard the official pronouncements. His eyes kept drifting to Zoe, who stood beside her mother's throne with an expression she could no longer hide. When the ceremony concluded, she approached him through the crowd. "Ambassador," she said formally. "There is a matter we must discuss in private." Eric followed her to a balcony overlooking the garden where they had shared so many conversations. Zoe turned to face him. "I am the heir to an empire," she said quietly. "I cannot simply follow my heart." Eric nodded. "I know. But," Zoe continued, "I also cannot pretend that my heart does not exist." They stood together as twin suns set over the capital city. The sky burned with colors that had no names in any human language. "What happens now?" Eric asked. Zoe took his hand again, just as she had in the medical wing. "Now we build something new. Together. Not human. Not Valorian. Something that has never existed before." Eric looked at her. "Your people will resist. Some will. But they will learn, just as I learned. Just as my mother learned. Change is frightening, but it is also necessary." Eric smiled. "For someone who once thought humans were primitive savages, you have come a long way." Zoe laughed softly. "For someone who refused to kneel before an empress, you have become surprisingly diplomatic." They stood in comfortable silence as stars began appearing overhead. Neither knew exactly what the future held. But they knew they would face it together. And somewhere in the throne room below, Queen Seraphine watched them through the window and smiled.